Greetings and salutations, Greek students. We continue our study of the Greek language by looking at the imperfect active indicative verb. So what I want to do is begin by reviewing how verbs work, overviewing the present active indicative and the present middle passive indicative, and then get into the imperfect, both in its grammar and syntax, and then the forms, the morphology of the imperfect active indicative. So let's get into it. The characteristics of Greek verbs are as follows. We have the first person, I and we, the second person, you or y'all in the plural, and the third person, he, she, it, and they in the plural. So we have person, first, second, and third, and then we have number, singular and plural. We also have tense, which in Greek is quite similar to how we think of tense as when an action is occurring, if it's in the present, if it's in the future, if it's back there in the past. And then we have voice. We've talked about voice, the active voice in which the subject of the verb performs the action. So if the Jesus casts a demon out, Jesus, the subject, performs the action of casting the demon out. We have those middle voice verbs. These are verbs that are typically, this is when the subject performs the action for him or herself. So we see in John there are slaves who are warming themselves by a fire. We see verbs like when you dress yourself or when you wash yourself, things that are actions typically performed. The subject performs the action for the person that is also the recipient of the action. And then we have the passive voice, those instances where the subject of the verb has the action performed upon them. The example we saw of this is in Revelation chapter 12, when the devil is cast out of heaven. The devil is the subject of the verb to be cast, but the devil is not casting, the devil is cast. It's receiving the action of being cast out of heaven. We've also talked about how we have the indicative and the infinitive moods. We'll talk more about that later on. And now we're adding tense. Now, we've talked about how tense can be related to time, but in Greek, verb tense also relates to the kind or how the action is described. So we have some verbs can be the present tense, happens right now, but it can also be in the imperfect tense is a past tense. So imperfect is past, but there's also a sense in which when you're talking about imperfect, you're talking about how the action is being described. And so an imperfective verb is something that's describing an ongoing, almost movie clip action. An undefined or an heuristic aspect of a verb is a snapshot. It's just a blink. And the completed or perfective aspect of a verb, I think of it like the instant replay. That is, it slows the action down and it looks at the present state of the past results. Was it a catch or not a catch in the instant replay? That's what you're looking for. You're looking for the significance, the present state of that past action when you're talking about the perfective aspect. So what we're going to focus on here is particularly the imperfect tense, which is a past action, and the imperfective aspect. The imperfect tense is a past action, but it's not a snapshot, it's that movie clip, it's that ongoing aspect description. Let me show you a few examples to help you understand what I mean. The imperfect tense and the imperfect aspect. So in Mark 8:24, it says, a great storm occurred in the sea, but he, that is Jesus, was sleeping. Now that verb, ekathuden, was sleeping, is imperfect. And so think about the action that's being described. What we have here is the disciples are in the boat, the storm is raging, and what we see is not just a snapshot that at some point Jesus was asleep. The picture is that as the storm is raging, we get a video clip of storm raging, Jesus sleeping. Right? It's that imperfect. It happened in the past, but what we're seeing is not just a snapshot snippet. We're seeing the process of Jesus asleep in the boat while the storm is raging. Another example in Mark 9:31, Jesus was teaching his disciples and was saying to them, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of men. And so the fact that this is an imperfect verb tells us not only that it was in the past, but that this was something that Jesus either began to say and said often, or it was something that Jesus thought about as being this ongoing action that he kept saying, or was the beginning of his process of saying it. So what we're getting is not that Jesus said it, snapshot, we're getting the video clip of Jesus saying this. One more example that gets at I think, a good way to think about the continuous aspect is that there is a woman with a discharge of blood. She's had this issue for 12 years. She's gone to all these physicians. It's gotten no better and worse. She heard reports about Jesus, and she came up behind him in the crowd to touch his garment. Why? The explanation in verse 28, for she was saying. Now, the fact that this is an imperfect, she was saying, means that this is something like she was almost chanting this or repeating this. She kept saying, if only I could touch the hem of his garments, I'll be made well. Or she was in the process of saying, if only I could touch the hem of the garments, as she's reaching out to touch his garment. What we're getting is the video clip of her saying this, not just one small snippet. We're getting the whole clip. And so this is an important part of thinking about how imperfect verbs work. They're not just snippets. You get the video clip, you get the portrait of the action unfolding. So what are the forms of the imperfect verb? Well, the imperfect verb has both a prefix and a suffix. This is important. So you're not only going to see the ending of the word change, right? Like we see with the present active indicative, o, ace, a, amen, ere, on, usi, sorry. We're also going to see a prefix. Now, the prefix is always that epsilon. So, luon, lus, lun, and this, like usi, has a movable nu. Sometimes the nu is there, sometimes it's not. Luamen, luete, luon. Now, you'll notice these are not totally unexpected, right? You can see the logic of the first, second, and third, singular and plural. They look kind of like what you've already seen. So when you think about the imperfect, when you see that epsilon prefix, that should be your dead giveaway. Oh, wow, epsilon prefix. What I'm looking at is an imperfect verb. So how do you translate luon? I was loosing. You were loosing. Lus, lun. He, she, it was loosing. Amen. We were loosing. Ete. You were loosing. On. They were loosing. So it's that idea of past, and then the ing gets at that sort of video clip action. Let's look at some more examples. Pistuo, epistuon, epistues, epistuen, epistuamen, epistuete, epistuon. I was believing. You were believing. He, she, it was believing. We were believing. You were believing. They were believing. Notice again the prefix epsilon and the suffixes. The addition of the prefix, of course, can cause augmentation to verbs that begin with vowels. So we think about verbs like akuo, that begins with that alpha, becomes ekuon, or echo becomes akuon, or iro becomes aron. Right? So when you have the epsilon that prefixes the verb added to another vowel, it does some different things that you have to be ready for. So the omicron on Othello becomes ophelon, or agero, he rises, becomes ageron, he was rising. Eurisco becomes euriscon. So you have to recognize that, when I see this epsilon prefix connecting with a vowel, it might not look like an epsilon. It might look like a lengthened vowel. So that's important to recognize with that augmentation. It also can occur that in compound verbs, when they have a prefix, so a verb like ekbalo, which is from the verb balo, to throw, and the preposition ek, out, to throw out or to cast out. Ekbalo is that regular word we see in exorcism narratives where Jesus, ekbalo, he casts out demons from people. When that has the imperfect, the epsilon prefix goes between the preposition ek and the verb balo, so becomes exebalon. Or apathenesko, I die, to apetheneskan. Apetheneskan. So from apa and thnesco, you place the prefix between them. Apokateno, I kill, becomes epekatanon. The epsilon prefix goes between the apa and the kateno. Katabino becomes katebainon, where the epsilon goes in between the preposition that's been prefixed to the verb and the verb stem. So, how do we know about the meaning of these imperfect verbs? It's determined by context. We've talked about they can be progressive, continuous action in the past. They can be customary, habitual action in the past. They can be conative, meaning that it's attempted action in the past. I was trying to dunk a basketball, but I was not successful. It can be inceptive, initiation of a past action in the past, of an action in the past. So these are all possible categories. I don't want you to worry too much about categories, but to sort of let our imagination permeate with the idea of the imperfect as a past action, but as a video clip of that past action so we can sort of help see what's going on. One last thing with the imperfects that you want to be aware of is the imperfect form of a me, right? We've seen a me, I am, a, estin, esmin, este, amen, or asin, excuse me. In the imperfect was, which you see the imperfect form of a me somewhat frequently in the New Testament, amen, ace, amen, ate, ason. Amen, ate, ason. You especially see it in this form of ain here. He, she, it was. He, she, it was. So you have to watch out. You have to be ready for that ain form. He, she, it was. Amen, ace, ain, amen, ate, ason. So that's the form of the imperfect. Remember, when you think about the imperfect, you should be thinking about the imperfect as a video clip of an action that occurred in the past.